Alright guys, so my car smells like ass only because I don't have an air freshener. Just blame it on that. But we're on chapter 16. I believe we have two more. This is one of the last two chapters, so let's finish this book, man. I want to start another one. So Tortilla Flat, chapter 16. Of the sadness of Danny, how through sacrifice Danny's friends gave a party, how Danny was translated. Let's roll the window up a bit, motherfuckers. Feels good right here. The sun's gonna move, so might not have shade for a while, but probably reading for about an hour. So chapter 16, of the sadness of Danny, how through sacrifice Danny's friends gave a party, how Danny was translated. When Danny came back to his house and to his friends after his amok, he was not conscience-stricken, but he was very tired. The rough fingers of violent experience had harpened upon his soul. He began to live listlessly, arising from bed only to sit on the porch under the rose of Castile, arising from the porch only to eat, arising from the table only to go to bed. The talk flowed about him and he listened, but he did not care. Cornelia Ruiz had a quick and superb run of husbands, and no emotion was aroused in Danny. When Big Joe got in his bed one evening, so apathetic was Danny that Balone and Pablo had to beat Big Joe for him. When Sammy Rasper, celebrating a belated New Year with a shotgun and a gallon of whiskey, killed a cow and went to jail, Danny could not even be drawn into a discussion of the ethics of the case, although the arguments raged about him, and although his judgment was passionately appealed to. After a while it came about that the friends began to worry about Danny. "He has changed," said Balone. "He is old." Jesus Maria suggested, "This Danny has crowded the good times of a life into a little 3 weeks. He is sick of fun." In vain the friends tried to draw him from the cavern of his apathy. In the mornings on the porch they told their funniest stories. They reported details of the love life of Tortilla Flat so penetrating that they would have been of interest to a dissection class. Balone winnowed the flat for news and brought home every seedling of interest to Danny, but there was age in Danny's eyes and weariness. "Thou art not well," Jesus Maria insisted in vain. "There is some bitter secret in thine heart." "No," said Danny. It was noticed that he let flies crawl on his feet a long time, and that when he did slap them off, there was no art in his stroke. Gradually the high spirits, the ready laughter went out of Danny's house and tumbled into the dark pool of Danny's quietness. Oh, it was a pity to see him, that Danny who had fought for lost causes or any other kind, that Danny who could drink glass for glass with any man in the world, that Danny who responded to the look of love like an aroused tiger. Now he sat on his front porch in the sunlight, his blue jean knees drawn up against his chest, his arms hanging over, his hands dangling from limp wrists, his head bent forward as though by a heavy black thought. His eyes had no light of desire, nor displeasure, nor joy, nor pain. Poor Danny, how has life left thee? Here thou sittest like the first man before the world grew up and around him. Here thou sittest like the first man before the world grew up around him, and like the last man after the world has eroded away. But see, Danny, thou art not alone. Thy friends are caught in this state of thine. They look at thee from their eye corners. They wait like expectant little dogs for the first waking movement of their master. One joyful word from thee, Danny, one joyful look, and they will bark and chase their tails. Thy life is not thine own to govern, Danny, for it controls other lives. See how thy friends suffer. Spring to life, Danny, that thy friends may live again. This, in effect, although not in words so beautiful, was what Balone said. Balone held out a jar of wine to Danny. "Come on," he said, "get up off your can. Get up off your ass," he's saying. Danny took the jar and drained it, and then he settled back and tried to find again his emotional nirvana. "Do you hurt any place?" Balone asked. "No," said Danny. Balone poured him another jar of wine and watched his face while the wine disappeared. The eyes lost their lackluster. Somewhere in the depths the old Danny stirred to life for a moment. He killed a fly with a stroke that would have done justice to a master. Slowly a smile spread over Palone's face, and later he gathered all the friends. Pablo and Jesus Maria and Big Joe and the pirate and Johnny Pom-Pom and Tito Ralph. Balone led them all into the gulch behind the house. "I gave Danny the last of the wine, and it did him good. What Danny needs is lots of wine and maybe a party. Where can we get wine?" Their minds combed the possibilities of Monterey like rat terriers in a barn. But there were no rats. These friends were urged on by altruism more pure than most men can conceive. They loved Danny. Jesus Maria said finally, "Chin Key is packing squids. Their minds bolted, turned with curiosity, and looked at the thing, crept stealthily back and sniffed it. It was several moments before their shocked imaginations could become used to the thing. But after all, why not? They argued silently. One day would not be so bad, only one day. Their faces showed the progress of the battle and how they were defeating their fears in the interest of Danny's welfare. I think it's work. They have a problem with work. Their faces showed the progress of the battle and how they were defeating their fears in the interest of Danny's welfare. We will do it, Balone said. Tomorrow we will all go down and cut squid, and tomorrow night we will give a party for Danny. When Danny awakened the next morning, the house was deserted. He got up from his bed and looked through the silent rooms, but Danny was not a man to brood very long. He gave it up as a problem and then as a thought. He went to the front porch and listlessly sat down. Is it premonition, Danny? Do you fear the fate that is closing in on you? Are there no pleasures left? No, Danny is as sunk in himself as he had been for a week. Not so Tortilla Flat. Early the rumor flew about. Danny's friends are cutting squids for Chin Key. It was a portent like the overthrow of government or even of the solar system. It was spoken of in the street, called over back fences to ladies who were just then hurrying to tell it. All of Danny's friends are down cutting squids. The morning was electric with the news. There must be some reason, some secret. Mothers instructed their children and sent them running toward Chen Key's squid yard. Young matrons waited anxiously behind their curtains for latter news, and news came. Pablo has cut his hand with a squid knife. Chen Key has kicked the pirates' dogs. Riot. The dogs are back. Balone looks grim. A few small bets were laid. For months, nothing so exciting had happened. During one whole morning, not a single person spoke of Cornelia Ruiz. It was not until the noon hour that the real news leaked out, but then it came with a rush. They're going to give a big party for Danny. Everyone is going. Instructions began to emerge from the squid yard. Mrs. Morales dusted her phonograph and picked out her loudest records. Some spark flared and Tortilla Flat was tender. 7 friends, indeed, to give a party for Danny. It is as though to say Danny had only 7 friends. Mrs. Soto descended upon her chicken yard with the cleaver. Mrs. Palo Chico poured a bag of sugar into her largest cooking pot to make dolces. A delegation of girls went into the Woolworth store in Monterey and bought the complete stock of colored crepe paper. Guitars and accordions cried experimentally through the flat. News, more news from the squid yard. They are going to make it. They are firm. They will have at least $14. See that 14 gallons of wine already. Torelli was overwhelmed with business. Everyone wanted to buy a gallon to take to Danny's house. Torelli himself, caught in the fury of the movement, said to his wife, "Maybe we will go to Danny's house. I will take a few gallons for my friends." Mr. Torelli, who had bought the house for $25. As the afternoon passed, waves of excitement poured over the flat. Dresses unworn in a lifetime were unpacked and hung to air. Shawls the moths had yearned for during 200 years hung from porch railings and exuded the odor of mothballs. And Danny, he sat like a half-melted man. He moved only when the sun moved. If he realized that every inhabitant of Tortilla Flat had passed his gate that afternoon, he gave no sign. Poor Danny. At least 24 pairs of eyes watched his front gate. At about 4 o'clock, he stood up, stretched, and sauntered out of his yard toward Monterey. Why, they hardly waited until he was out of sight. Oh, the twisting and stringing of green and yellow and red crepe paper. Oh, the candles shaved and the shavings thrown on the floor. Oh, the mad children who skated the wax unevenly. Food appeared, basins of rice, pots of steaming chicken, dumplings to startle you, and the wine came, gallons and gallons of it. Martinez dug up a keg of potato whiskey from his manure pile and carried it to Danny's house. At 5:30, the friends marched up the hill, tired and bloody but triumphant. So must the old guard have looked when they returned to Paris after Austerlitz. They saw the house bristling with color. They laughed at their weariness fell from them. They were so happy that tears came into their eyes. Mama Chipo walked into the yard, followed by her 2 sons, who carried a wash tub of salsa pura between them. Paulito, that rich scamp, rushed the fire under a big kettle of beans and chili. Shouts, songs broken off, shrieks of women, the general turmoil of excited children. A car full of apprehensive policemen drove up from Monterey. "Oh, it is only a party. Sure, we'll have a glass of wine. Don't kill anybody." "Where is Danny?" Lonely as smoke on a clear, cold night, he drifts through Monterey in the evening. To the post office he goes, to the station, to the pool rooms on Alvarado Street, to the wharf where the black water mourns among piles. "What is it, Danny? What makes you feel this way?" Danny didn't know. There was an ache in his heart like the farewell to a dear woman. There was vague sorrow in him like the despair of autumn. He walked past the restaurants he used to smell with interest, and no appetite was aroused in him. He walked by Madame Zuka's great establishment and exchanged no obscene jests with the girls in the windows. Back to the wharf he went. He leaned over the rail and looked into the deep, deep water. Do you know, Danny, how the wine of your life is poured into the fruit jars of the gods? Do you see the procession of your days in the oily water among the piles? He remained motionless, staring down. They were worried about him at Danny's house when it began to get dark. The friends left the party and trotted down the hill into Monterey. They asked, "Have you seen Danny?" "Yes, Danny walked by here an hour ago. He walked slow." Palone and Pablo hunted together. They traced their friend over the route he had followed, and at last they saw him on the end of the dark pier. He was lighted by a dim electric wharf light. They hurried out to him. Pablo did not mention it then, but even afterwards it was his custom when Danny was mentioned to describe what he saw as he and Palone walked out on the wharf toward Danny. "There he stood," Pablo always said. "I could just see him leaning on the rail. I looked at him and then I saw something else. At first it looked like a black cloud in the air over Danny's head, and then I saw it was a big black bird as big as a man. It hung in the air like a hawk over a rabbit hole. I crossed myself and said 2 Hail Marys. The bird was gone when we came to Danny." Palone did not see it. Moreover, Palone did not remember Pablo crossing himself and saying the Hail Marys. But he never interfered with the story, for it was Pablo's story. They walked rapidly toward Danny. The wharf boards drummed hollowly under their feet. Danny did not turn. They took him by the arms and turned him about. "Danny, what is wrong?" "Nothing, I'm all right." "Are you sick, Danny?" "No." "Then what is it that makes you so sad?" "I don't know," said Danny. "I just feel this way. I don't want to do anything." "Maybe a doctor could do something for you, Danny." "I tell you, I am not sick." "Then look," Palone cried. "We are having a party for you at your house. We're having a party for you at your house. Everybody in Tortilla Flat is there, and music and wine and chicken. There are maybe 20 or 30 gallons of wine and bright paper hanging up. Don't you want to come?" Danny breathed deeply. For a moment he turned back to the deep black water. Perhaps he whispered to the gods a promise or a defiance. He swung around again to his friends. His eyes were feverish. "You're goddamn right I want to go. Hurry up, I am thirsty. Any girls there?" "Lots of girls, all the girls. Come on then, hurry up." He led them, running up the hill. Long before they arrived, they could hear the sweetness of the music through the pines and the shrill notes of excited, happy voices. The 3 belated ones arrived at a dead run. Danny lifted his head and howled like a coyote. Jars of wine were held out to him. He took a gulp from each one. "That was a party for you." Always afterward, when a man spoke of a party with enthusiasm, someone was sure to say with reverence, "Did you go to that party at Danny's house?" And unless the first speaker were a newcomer, he had been there. That was a party for you. No one ever tried to give a better one. Such a thing was unthinkable. For within 2 days, Danny's party was lifted out of possible comparison with all other parties that ever were. What man came out of that night without some glorious cuts and bruises? Never had there been so many fights, not fights between 2 men, but roaring battles that raged through whole clots of men, each one for himself. Oh, the laughter of women, thin and high and brittle as spun glass. Oh, the ladylike shrieks of protest from the gulch. Father Ramon was absolutely astounded and incredulous at the confessions the next week. The whole happy soul of Tortilla Flat tore itself from restraint and arose into the air, one ecstatic unit. They danced so hard that the floor gave way in one corner. The accordions played so loudly that always afterwards they were wind-broken like foundered horses. And Danny, just as this party knew no comparison, so Danny defied emulation as a celebrant. In the future, let some squirt say with excitement, "Did you see me? Did you see me ask that nigger wenches for a dance? Did you seen us go round and round like a tomcat's?" And some old wise and baleful eye would be turned on him. Some voice, sated with having known the limit of possibilities, would ask quietly, "Did you see Danny the night of the party?" Sometime a historian may write a cold, dry, fungus-like history of the party. He may refer to the moment when Danny defied and attacked the whole party, men, women, and children with a table leg. He may conclude, a dying organism is often observed to be capable of extraordinary endurance and strength, referring to Danny's superhuman, amorous activity that night. The same historian may write with unshaking hand, when any living organism is attacked, its whole function seems to aim toward reproduction. Its whole function seems to aim toward reproduction. He may refer to the moment when Danny Defiant attacked the whole party, men, women, children, with a table leg. Kind of seems like he attacked them. He was trying to fuck everybody. I don't know. But I'd say, and the people of Tortilla Flat would say, to hell with it. That Danny was a man for you. No one kept actual count, and afterwards, naturally, no lady would willingly admit that she had been ignored, so that the reputed prowess of Danny may be somewhat overstated. 1/10 of it would be an overstatement for anyone in the world. Where Danny went, a magnificent madness followed. It is passionately averred in Tortilla Flat that Danny alone drank 3 gallons of wine. It must be remembered, however, that Danny is now a god. In a few years it may be 30 gallons. In 20 years it may be plainly remembered that the clouds flamed and spelled Danny in tremendous letters, that the moon dripped blood, that the wolf of the world bayed prophetically from the mountains of the Milky Way. Gradually a few of those whose stuff was less stern than Danny's began to wilt, to sag, to creep out from underfoot. Those who were left, feeling the lack, shouted the louder, fought the more viciously, danced the harder. In Monterey, the motors of the fire trucks were kept running, and the firemen in their red tin hats and raincoats silently sat in their places and waited. The night passed quickly, and still Danny roared through the party. What happened is attested by many witnesses, both men and women, and although their value as witnesses is sometimes attacked on the ground that they had drunk 30 gallons of wine and a keg of potato whiskey, those people are solely sure of the major points. It took some weeks to get the story into line. Some said one thing, some another, but gradually the account clarified into the reasonable form it now has and always will have. Danny, say the people of Tortilla Flat, had been rapidly changing his form. He had grown huge and terrible, his eyes flared like the headlights of an automobile. There was something fearsome about him. There he stood in the room of his own house. He held the pine table in his right hand, and even it had grown. Danny challenged the world. "Who will fight?" he cried. "Is there no one left in the world who is not afraid?" The people were afraid. That table leg, so hideous and so alive, had become a terror to them all. Danny swung it back and forth. The accordion's wheezed to silence. The dancing stopped. The room grew chill, and the silence seemed to roar in the air like an ocean. "No one?" Danny cried again. "Am I alone in the world? Will no one fight with me?" The men shuddered before his terrible eyes and watched fascinated the slashing path of the table leg through the air. And no one answered the challenge. Danny drew himself up. It is said that his head just missed touching the ceiling. Then I will go out to the one who can fight. I will find the enemy who is worthy of Danny. He stalked to the door, staggering a little as he went. The terrified people made a broad path for him. He bent to get out of the door. The people stood still and listened. Outside the house, they heard his roaring challenge. They heard the table leg whistle like a meteor through the air. They heard his steps charging down the road, and then behind the house in the gulch, they heard an answering challenge so fearful and so chill that their spines wilted like nasturtium stems under frost. Even now, when the people speak of Danny's opponent, they lower their voices and look furtively about. They heard Danny change to the fray. They heard his last shrill cry of defiance, then a thump, and then silence. For a long moment the people waited, holding their breaths lest the harsh rush of air from their lungs should obscure some sound. But they listened in vain. The night was hushed and the gray dawn was coming. Pallone broke the silence. "Something is wrong," he said. And Pallone it was who first rushed out of the door. Brave man, no terror could restrain him. The people followed him. Back of the house they went where Danny's footsteps had sounded, and there was no Danny. They came to the edge of the gulch where a sharp zigzag path led down to the bottom of that ancient watercourse wherein no stream had flowed for many generations. The following people saw Pallone dart down the path. They went after him slowly, and they found Pallone at the bottom of the gulch, leaning over a broken and twisted Danny. He had fallen 40 feet. Pallone lighted a match. "I think he is alive," he shrieked. "Run for a doctor. Run for Father Ramon." The people scattered. Within 15 minutes, 4 doctors were awakened, dragged from their beds by frantic paisanos. They were not allowed that slow deliberateness by which doctors love to show that they are no slaves to emotion. No, they were hustled, rushed, pushed. Their instrument cases were shoved into their hands by men hopelessly incapable of saying what they wanted. Father Ramon, dragged from his bed, came panting up the hill, uncertain whether it was a devil to drive out, a newborn baby to baptize before it died, or a lynching to attend. Meanwhile, Pallone, Pablo, and Jesus Maria carried Danny up the hill and laid him on his bed. They stood candles all about him. Danny was breathing heavily. First the doctors arrived. They glanced suspiciously at one another, considered precedents, but the moment of delay brought threatening looks into the eyes of the people. It did not take long to look Danny over. They were all through by the time Father Ramon arrived. I shall not go into the bedroom with Father Ramon, for Pallone, Pablo, and Jesus Maria, and Big Joe, and Johnny Pom-Pom, and Tito Ralph, and the pirate and the dogs were there. And they were Danny's family. The door was and is closed, for after all there is pride in men, and some things cannot decently be pried into. But in the big room, crowded to suffocation with the people of Tortilla Flat, there was tenseness and a waiting silence. Priests and doctors had developed a subtle means of communication. When Father Ramon came out of the bedroom, his face had not changed. But at sight of him, the woman broke into a high and terrible wail. The men shifted their feet like horses in a box stall, and then went outside into the dawning, and the bedroom door remained closed. So he's dead, huh? Fucking Danny. Fucking Danny, dude. Like this, I think this is a legit story, man. Obviously, he added some shit to it, but and then, like when you see somebody and it seems real, it doesn't seem as silly as when you write it down and you add like humor to your mind. Because a lot of this humor in reality is happening with no humor at all, you know? It's happening like nobody really, everybody has their own life to live. So only when we read a book are we sitting here watching. You know, old people probably watch and see how silly their decisions they're making. But Danny was bored. Danny, like, seemingly the responsible one, really was just he inherited those properties. And he wasn't responsible at all. He allowed his friends to live there. He was a good dude, but damn, who killed him? Who killed him?